I know this strays a little bit from the tech scene and into the vlogging area, but people have been asking me about my gear, so I'm going to share that with you. Hang on, here it comes. So I just got my new EFF shirt today, so I'm wearing that, so excited about that. So I've been getting a lot of questions about, hey, you look so awesome in that video. I don't get that question at all. God, my glasses are so filthy, I can't see what the hell I'm doing. And there is a lot of glare coming at me right now, man, and it's freaking me out. Let's try that again. That did not help much. So I get a lot of people asking me, what are you doing with these videos? How are you doing them? What gear are you using to produce them? What's the magic? I just wanted to kind of run through some of that stuff for everybody. But before I go there, I'm going to start off with the laptop I use, which is the Mac. As I mentioned in a previous video, I had an accident with my Mac. I'm going to get that way in there. Let's see if I can get it to focus. There it is, where the trackpad shattered. So the problem with these new Macintoshes is they operate under the philosophy that a lot of these parts are just sort of mass replaceable. So rather than just replacing the glass on the trackpad, the way that Apple does it now is you have to replace the whole top case, which is what this is. You know, initially I thought, well, you know, replacing the top case, you know, makes it simpler for the repairs and this, that, and the other thing. Except that is not at all the case. And I should roll a little B-roll here so that you can see what I went through. The idea is that the top case has the batteries, the keyboard, trackpad, all that stuff, and you just replace it. But the problem is you got to go through the back. So you have to take every single component of the computer apart. So I don't see how that's an easier replacement. Or maybe what Apple does is they just, you know, you take off the bottom case, take the whole thing off and just replace it, because you got to swap out the motherboard, you got to swap out everything. You have to take the whole damn thing apart, which is a lot of work. One of the reasons why you got to get it with the batteries in it, because the batteries are glued in, and it turns out a lot of other parts are actually glued in as well. The microphone that's in the laptop is glued in, and there's no way to get it out. They say, you know, like apply heat and then the glue loosens up. Forget that. It ain't happening. You're not going to get your microphone back. That's just the way it is. It's kind of a dodgy thing. And the other thing that I found out about this is that the internal parts of the new MacBook Pros are not as robust as they used to be. And so I would say that if you break your trackpad, I think you're just in it for the $700 repair from Apple. I would not recommend replacing the top case like I did. It was an insanely complicated thing. Not for the faint of heart, for sure. There was a point where I thought, I'm just not going to get this thing back together. I would really, really appreciate it if Apple would start making their computers a little bit more repairable, because this is insane. And the amount of stuff you got to throw out because they glue everything together is nuts. That's not a very green laptop. On to the rest of the kit. Starting with software, what I use is Final Cut Pro. Now, a lot of folks are in the Premiere Pro world, and it's a great product too, and it does some really amazing things. So how Photoshop does image removal, now you can do that in Premiere Pro, which is a pretty cool feature. And there's nothing comparable on the Final Cut Pro side. I personally prefer Final Cut, But I would say if you're just getting going, iMovie is more than acceptable. I started doing these with iMovie as well, and Final Cut can be a little bit expensive, and then you have to add on a lot of different things. There's plugins and effects and all sorts of stuff. One other thing to consider too is if you do go the GarageBand route, GarageBand comes with a lot of sound effects, so if you need sound effects for your videos, that helps. All right, so let's start with the camera. So the camera I'm using right now is a Canon EOS M6. And it's been a great camera. It's got a little flip up screen so that I can look at myself when I'm making these videos. And it's not that expensive. I got it as part of a video creator kit. It came with the Rode VideoGo microphone and an SD card. It was a good value at the time. I probably wouldn't go for this camera if I were buying today. So I don't generally shoot 4K video, but that may be an important thing for some people. For these types of things that I'm doing, 4K gets a little unwieldy. It takes up a lot of space. It's kind of a pain. Cameras are more expensive. It just doesn't have the kind of value to me that maybe it does to some. But I would say that if you do shoot videos where you want to crop in on them, 4K would give you that extra resolution to help you do that. So some of the things that are important to me, I want to be able to shoot in 1080p at 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, roughly 29 and change, and 60 frames per second. If you could get a camera that shoots 120 frames per second, that's awesome because you can do those really tasty sort of B-roll cinematic slow motions. But you can get there pretty well with 60 as well. I like to do my videos at 24 or 29 frames per second. It gives it a little bit of motion blur, which gives it a little bit more of a cinematic effect because that's what you get out of film and that's what your eyes see too. And when you start shooting in the 60 frames per second, it can get very harsh looking. And if you go even higher frame rates than that, some of the commercials and some of the big movie studios will shoot very high frame rates, but that's not typically what you're going to see on YouTube. Like I said, I'm shooting the Canon EOS M6 right now. I've got a Canon EFM 22mm f2.0 lens on it. It's a great focal length for what I'm doing right here. It's a really bright lens, so I can really open up the aperture and get tons of soft depth of field, so you can see things are blurred back there. And if I get in closer and it focuses on me, you can see how soft everything goes in the background. So that's a really nice touch, and the bokeh on the lens is pretty nice, and it's a really cheap lens for what you get. So it's a pretty good value. It's not the best lens I've ever used, but it's a good value. But were I looking today, I think I would take a look at the EOS M50. It's got a lot of nice features that aren't available in the M6. I think it would be a better camera for what I'm doing here. The other camera that I would really consider is the new Sony A6400. Sony's been making some amazing cameras. The camera of choice for a lot of the high-end vloggers is the Sony A7 III, which is an amazing camera, but in the $2,000 price range. So the EOS M50 and the A6400 are both going to be under $1,000, probably with a kit lens as well. They have a lot of nice features, and they both feature screens that can flip up so you can monitor yourself, which is nice. The other camera I use is actually my iPhone XS. And the thing that's nice about the iPhone is that it'll do 60 frames per second at 4K and 120 frames per second at 1080. You can even get it up to 240 frames per second at 1080p. So if you want to do some really nice slow motion stuff, it can do it. So when I go to shows, I'll do like a time-lapse capture where I walk the floor really quick and it just sort of runs through it really quick. And I usually do that on the iPhone with the DJI Osmo 2 gimbal. And I'll say this, the DJI Osmo 2 gimbal is amazing. It keeps the camera very steady. As much as you're shaking it around, it really does a great job stabilizing the camera. I did just hear that a new gimbal came out at NAB called the Moza Mini S, and it's been getting really favorable reviews. A couple nice things about it that interest me are, one, it's got a tripod at the bottom because with these gimbals, you want to be able to put them down at some point. So with the DJI Osmo 2, the phone fits in this cradle and then it butts up against this piece. The problem with that is you've got your lightning connector at the bottom of your phone. So if you want to plug in a microphone or any kind of accessories or even charge your phone while you're doing this, it can be a little bit of a dodgy proposition. Whereas the Moza Mini S gimbal does not cover the bottom of the phone like that. So that's kind of a nice thing if you wanted to add in microphones. Because sometimes I do take this thing out and I add a microphone on it. I have one of the real small Rode microphones that I attach to my iPhone, and it's hard to get it to work with this gimbal. When I'm on the road and I'm doing shows or something like that, I use a Roxant Pro stabilizer, It's a little tricky to use, and getting the balance figured out is kind of challenging, and then understanding how to utilize a Steadicam like that can be a bit of a challenge for people. But once you get the hang of it, you can get great steady footage. And if you're using a wide angle lens or doing slow-mo video, it can be extremely stable. The one thing to keep in mind is you do have to put oil in that ball joint so that it's loose. So let's move on to lights. I've been using the Neewer bicolor 480 LEDs. I've got one, two, and then I got a different light back, a couple different lights back here. I've actually wall mounted these. Neewer makes these wall mounts that just are like the 5/8 inch mount for a lighting stand so that you can mount lights onto it, or you can get a friction arm and put that on and mount cameras or whatever. And I'm using them all over the place. They're great to have. It's a really great way to simplify the space. Neewer sells a kit that comes with light stands and all of that too. So that's kind of a nice little option. These lights come with a diffuser screen. I put the diffuser screen in there to sort of soften up the lights. It's great. I recommend people going with, that 3-point camera setup where you have a key light, a fill light to the side, and a hair light in the back. And then the other piece of it is you got to think about your background. I'll include a link to these little LED lights that I've got in the background. They come on a string. They're USB powered, and they're like a mile long. I don't even know what to do with all the lights that came on that one strand. It's a good value on the lights, and it gives a little bit of something going on in the background and makes it a little bit more interesting. And because they're more of a tungsten sort of color temperature, this provides some contrast with sort of this brighter light that I've got going on here. So I've got back here as this hair light, Yongnuo YN300 light. It's kind of a small one. It's a portable light, and I throw it in my bag when I'm traveling because it's a very bright light, and it's bicolor, so I can do either 5600K or 2700K, I believe it is. I can either approximate more of a daylight temperature of a light, or I can approximate more of a tungsten light, depending on what my ambient lighting situation is and where I'm at. And it's small, compact, battery operated, or it can run off of a cord. So it's a good flexible option. So sound is actually probably more important than video quality. Making your videos sound good is really a key part of making your videos better. Certainly this Shure SM7B, that was probably very noisy. The Shure SM7B is used widely by broadcasters. You see them in a lot of these vlogging videos. The Shure SM7B was the microphone that Michael Jackson used to sing Thriller. I like it a lot. It works well for my voice. It may not work the best for everybody's voice. It's not the loudest microphone that you can buy. So for me, having a loud voice, it works great. For somebody with a softer voice, you might want to consider something different. It's a little bit pricey, but it's good. So for my portable rig, I'm using the Rode VideoMic Go. Now, this isn't the best of the Rode mics, but it came in that creator's kit that I bought with the EOS M6. It works quite well. I actually have very few complaints about it, but if I were going to buy a separate mic, I might look at the Rode VideoMic Pro, which has a little bit of better sound quality. One other thing to consider is that if you want to plug that microphone into an iPhone, you're going to need a different cable because the iPhone uses a TRRS, tip ring sleeve cable, whereas the cameras use just a TRS cable. I'll put a link to that TRRS to TRS cable in the notes. I run everything into a Scarlett 6i6 audio interface. I like the Focusrite products. They've done right by me, but you could look at getting a Focusrite Solo, which may be a better option for you on a budget. It'll work great for you. Just doesn't have as many inputs and outputs. For monitors, I like KRK Rocket 5s. They're good value. I would also recommend the Shure SE215s in-ear earbuds. They're also good value. They're inexpensive. I use articulating friction arms all over the place. I've got Manfrotto one here on this thing, but the camera's actually mounted to one of those Neewer 5/8 inch wall mounts, and then I've got an articulating friction arm on there holding the camera up. You can use them for a million different things. They hold a whole bunch of different things. They're great to have around, and you'll always find a use for them. So I recommend those highly. And then, you know, for all of this stuff, some of the, you know, your cameras, I get extra batteries, get extra battery charging packs. All these lights use Sony batteries, so you can get some of those extra batteries and chargers. That's a really handy thing to have. And I would recommend getting some extra SD cards. The 64 gig ones, 32 and 64, I don't like the really big ones because I don't like having too much on one card at any one time. And I like the ability to swap things in and out. That way, if I lose a card, I'm not losing so much. I'll put all the links in the description below, and hopefully you can find something that's useful to you there. And I will see you in the next video.